Yeah, glad to be here.
So, why don't you just give our listeners a little bit of a rundown on how you became an entrepreneur and a little bit of the description of the business you used to own?
Sure. I believe it or not, I went into an industry that I went to school for. I graduated with hospitality management, and right out of college, I went to work for a company called Business Incentives, or nowadays they're known as BI. What they did is they would run incentive trips for major corporations, and my job was as a travel advisor. So I would go into these cities ahead of the groups, Acapulco or Hawaii or wherever, and just make sure everything's set up. Hotels set up, the golf courses for the golf tournaments, if we're doing tours, that type of thing. So I did that for a couple of years, and it really had a big impact on me as far as what I ended up doing into the future. Uh,
What was some of the biggest impact that led your way?
Well, just as far as I remember there was a group, International Harvester, we had in Hawaii, and it was back to back to back, and I think 6 weeks of it. Meeting them out at the airport and getting them on the right buses and moving them around to luau's, and just seeing how it's a behind the scenes type of work that people don't appreciate really unless it goes wrong, and so I really fell in love with that type of work. I ended up from business incentives going to a resort in northern Minnesota called Quadna, where I was the director of sales. And so many major corporations would come up to Quadna, the 3Ms and General Mills of the world, and I'd talk with meeting planners, and they'd say, there really isn't a good, at the time it was called ground operator. Eventually, it became destination management, and even grew from that. So I have these discussions with meeting planners from Minneapolis, and they'd say, "Yeah, there isn't a good one in the Twin Cities." And so that stuck with me. And in 1984, I ended up opening my business, Metro Connections, and it was just myself. And I was in one of these incubators over in Energy Park in St. Paul, where they'd have one receptionist, and then there'd be all of us startups trying to survive. And I ended up, I remember I started with $3,000 that I had saved from working up at Quadna, and that was gone in about a month. And so I had to have my dad co-sign on a loan to just survive. But I did survive, and I ended up bringing on partners as I was growing the business, and ended up bringing on three partners.
So, when is you're bringing on what was the time frame from when you started kind of making it on your own to when you brought in the couple partners?
My first partner was 4 years after I had started, and it was my brother-in-law, David Graves, and he came on. He was working sales for the Marriott, and he came on for a year and was just an employee. And then after a year, he was able to acquire shares. And then his brother Mike Graves came on right around that same time on a part-time basis. Yet he ended up acquiring shares more into early 90s. I remember we had the Olympic Festival was going on, and that was the first time we could actually employ Mike full time. And
Interesting. So when you're, I guess a couple questions. So why, what, what, what happened? Were they bought into the shares? Was there a reasoning that you wanted? Did they contribute capital? And what was the kind of the dialogue that was going between you guys?
well, I remember one time when I first started the business, right, it had to have been within the first 6 months. I met with a SCORE representative, and he was a previous business owner, and he said, the one thing that he left me was, don't be so concerned about having 100% shares. That if you find good people, find a way to make them owners of your business. And both David and Mike were phenomenal, and I knew I needed them if I wanted to grow the business. And so we worked that out. We discounted what the value of our shares were to make it affordable, and worked out contracts with them so that they, on an annual basis, towards the end of the year, we do some bonusing that would help them acquire shares, and it worked out well.
That's
So,
interesting.
yeah, and the third partner came on. Tom McCullough came on in 1998, and so as the business grew, and just so you know a little bit more about Metro Connections, so you have an understanding of what we do or did, and they still do, is it's a conference event and transportation services. So when major conventions, major events would come into the Twin Cities, we would be there to service them. And we would provide all kinds of services, from major shuttle systems to productions where they needed proper staging and videoing, to theme parties, to their registration, as far as full registration services. And yeah, it really was, we just didn't say no. I mean, if a conference or an event needed something, we usually figured out a way to get it done. And we took on some pretty big things that came into the Twin Cities. We worked with the Alcoholics Anonymous Convention, which was the largest convention ever to come into the Twin Cities. I think that was in 2000. Had about 50,000 people.
Holy cow.
Yeah, when the Super Bowl was here in '92, we worked with that. We had about, I want to say 8 to 9 good corporate events. And we saw more revenue in that 1 week than we did in 4 months. It was just unbelievable. Just to give you an idea of the kinds of things we did, Chrysler had us take over, at the time it was called Canterbury Downs, now it's Canterbury Park. But Chrysler had us take that over. We created a winter wonderland. And yeah, it was great. We brought in snowmobiles. We created these cross-country ski trails. We had ice sculptures of their vehicles. We had a skating rink. We brought in all the warm clothes. And they absolutely loved it. It was a great event.
That's awesome. So when these customers of yours are engaging with you, give us a little bit of a rundown of exactly how the contracts worked, or how the engagements or the revenue came in and out of the company.
Yeah, we would charge various ways. It really depended on what type of services they needed. If it was let's say it's an association convention where the people are paying on their own, then we would have a per person price that the people would pay individually. If it were a major corporate group, and let's say they needed a theme party, maybe we'd say, okay, to do that, it's $25,000, and this is what you get. And it would lay out the different props we'd provide, and the staffing needed, and our fee would be built into that. So yeah, there's a need for this service throughout the world. And when I sold the business, the revenues were at right around 16 million.
Nice. So what kind of growth did you experience over the years that you were one of the partners?
Well, in the early years, it seemed like we were doubling our sales, and then we kind of leveled off for a while at about that 5 million mark, and then we just continued to grow. I remember 9/11. We really took a beating. That was, I think, in that 1 week after 9/11, we lost about 30 groups. Either events or, yeah, it was incredible. We were doing a lot of refunding back, and we really had to change our model somewhat in that, we were fairly dependent on groups flying in, and after 9/11, nobody was flying. So what we ended up doing, we ended up in 2003 buying a warehouse in Burnsville, 35,000 square foot warehouse, and really focused on team building, working with corporations that are here locally that they weren't flying either, but they needed to meet. They needed to boost their morale. And so we would come up with all these different team building activities, and it really took off, and it really helped. Chili cook-offs and garage wars where we would build these bicycles for charity, and it was a good thing to do to continue bringing in revenue and to continue to keep our employees on.
Nice. So then, between 9/11 and the time you decided to sell, explain to the listeners a little bit about why you decided, or what was there a triggering event, or was there something that happened personally or within the business?
I don't think there was one triggering event. I want to say around the early 2000s, I started thinking about exiting, but not real seriously. I'd go to seminars and listen to companies like Calhoun companies that would talk about how to exit your business. And I want to say around 2010, I actually got the book Built to Sell from John Warrillow and shared it with my partners, and we all read it and said, yeah, we need to do some things to increase the value of our business and also to be ready when we're ready to leave. And so we started changing some things. And
what was the first thing was there a couple like major ahas that you found after you read the book?
Yeah, I think the main thing was to look at the team of employees we have or had and say, okay, let's give them more responsibility. Well, let's get it to the point where they can run things and they're not so dependent on us. And we really had a good staff. When I left, we had about 60 employees full-time, and then part-time maybe another 60. But we would, and that's really how I was able to leave, was that I took all the things that I was doing. And what we ended up doing with our partnership is we really took areas of the business and we oversaw each area. So I oversaw the finance, the HR, transportation and tours. David worked out of our warehouse, and he oversaw the events and production. Mike and Tom oversaw conference services with the registration, and Tom focused more on the marketing. So we all said, okay, let's figure out ways that we can give more responsibility to our employees. I ended up giving more responsibility to a woman that was more in our accounting, and she became the finance manager. Another woman became our HR manager, and then another woman that was in transportation and tours. I ended up promoting her to be the director of the department. And so really, I had myself sitting in the corner office, not really being all that needed. And
was that tough to not be needed, or was it because it was part of your plan that it didn't bother you?
Oh, it was tough. I mean, it was part of the plan, but it became somewhat boring. And but I knew that's what I needed to do if I was going to exit the business and not have the business so dependent on me. And so yeah, that's really what we did.
So a couple questions for you, because I think there's this connotation of exit planning that it's a transaction, right? Or that I actually go back to when my dad and I owned our business, where if you go to an exit planning seminar, your employees are going to freak out because they think you're selling right away. How did you navigate that, or did you experience any of that?
I did, and I never had a situation where an employee said, "Oh, what were you going to that seminar for?" But I had a funny situation where I was in one, and you're always, like you say, you're kind of hiding in the back, hoping nobody sees you. And one of my vendors was there.
Oh no!
Yeah, and we both tried to do the hide thing, and then we finally had a break, went up to each other, and just kind of laughed and said, "Okay, you don't say anything if I don't say anything." And a lot of these seminars are really put on to grow your business and to improve the value. And so, I mean, if I was ever approached on it, and that's what I was doing anyway. So.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of our listeners and a lot of people that I know, and probably think about it, it's like it's actually a process. It's not a transaction. Doesn't mean that you're going. I mean, it's the reality of the world that we live in that you will eventually leave your business, and it just doesn't necessarily mean today. So I think it's a myth that almost needs to be debunked a little bit. Where you got to. I mean, for you, there's not a lot of people that I know that start a process that soon and actually start to implement it like that. So it's very interesting. So
Yeah, it is a process. I mean, as mentioned, I started in 2005 and I sold in 2012. I got serious in 2010, and so that was 2 years. And I'm selling businesses now, and I tell business owners, I tell them expect once you've decided you're ready to sell, it even there's even a process there. It takes 6 months to a year once you've signed a contract and said, yes, I'm ready to go. So you really need to allow the time.
So as you were going through that process, obviously the name of the podcast is Life After Business. Did you have any idea what that was going to be like for you, or were you more focused on the process in your business?
Well, what I did was at the same time in 2010, I was saying, okay, I'm going to exit the business. What do I want to do afterwards? And I had done some research and checking on careers because I just wasn't ready to retire and do nothing, and had looked into business brokerage and selling businesses. And I went to a convention, their international convention, and ended up really liking it and liking what the lifestyle can be. It's a good career to have once you get into your 60s and 70s. The knowledge and the experience is needed. So I ended up getting certified to be a business intermediary. So my mindset really was my next career. So as I was going through the process to sell my business, I was thinking more and more as the months went on about this new career and less about my business.
So you were creating that second career, which there's a book called Second Half by Bob Bifford, where they talk about building your second career while you're currently in your first career. It's an interesting thought process.
It really makes sense that if you're going to sell your business, you really need to have a plan as to what you are going to do once you exit the business. And I'm selling businesses now, and I'm amazed at how many business owners don't have a plan. That they sell and they think, okay, I have this windfall. I'll sit around and play golf and travel a lot. And we've even had business owners that do that for a couple of years, and then they come back and go, okay, I'm going crazy. I need to find another business to buy. And if they're buying another business, it's usually a smaller one, so there's not as much stress, but they are buying another business just to keep busy.
To keep in the game, as I was told by one person.
Yep, exactly.
So as you were going through the transition, explain a little bit about the actual sale process. What was the process that you went through to get it valued, and then who did you look to for the potential acquirers? Well,
what happened was my partners and I, we always would do a meeting, a retreat in the fall. And I think it was 2011 where I went to my partners and I said, okay, guys, I'm ready to exit. Let's sell the business. And they looked at me like I was crazy and said, well, we don't want to sell. And they're younger than I am, and they were really into what was going on at the time. And so I said, okay, then we need to work something out where the business buys me out. And so that's what we did. I worked with our CPA and our business attorney, who our attorney actually was a business attorney, and that's real important that people know when they go through the process. You want a business attorney because they know how to get these deals done, and they're very knowledgeable on selling businesses. So we leaned on them. We had the valuation we did. We always would have a valuation because we had a buy-sell in place. So we did one every year with our accountant, and we always felt our accountant's valuation was probably somewhat conservative. And so what we all agreed to was, let's take our accountant's valuation and let's go out and get one from a business broker we think would be maybe a little higher. And it did turn out that way. And we said, okay, let's take the average of that, and that's what the price will be. And we all agreed to that, and there were no issues with it.
So what was the year, the time frame? Because you said
Well,
between.
this would have been 2011, towards the end of 2011. So it still took a full year to get the deal done. There was just a lot of, they weren't sure about it. I was sure about it. I knew I wanted to move on, and their hesitation wasn't so much with the value of the business. It was, their hesitation really was on, how much value I had to the business and how much I'd be missed, which I knew I wasn't contributing as much anymore, that I had removed myself. So that really wasn't a concern. And I think they also were concerned about, okay, the company's going to pay all this money out to Sam. That's going to be a big hit, which I explained to them, yeah, but I'm also going to be gone. And right now I'm expensive to the business. And they finally, it took a year to realize that. We had many meetings about it. And I think, the business continues to grow. It's doing better than when I was there. And I think they're realizing it now that when they do distributions, it's not with 4 people, but it's with 3. And they really like that.
I bet.
Yeah.
So your agreement with them was an earnout over a certain period of time?
Well, what we were going to do, we were going to do an SBA loan. And I, at the time, was all for that. I thought, great, let's do SBA. I'll get paid all at once. And, sometimes with SBA, there is a promissory note that the seller has to have, but it's usually minor, maybe 5 or 10%. So I was all for the SBA. It didn't work out, though, to go with SBA, because the way SBA works is if there are assets out there, SBA locks onto that, and with the partners, it was more heavily with one partner, and so it was difficult for him to agree to an SBA situation where he's really putting collateral down for a lot of his assets. So that was kind of, at the beginning of the process. So then the process stopped, and I said, okay, how are we going to get this deal done? And so I ended up having to be the bank. So we didn't do an earnout. There was no earnout involved, where you look at the success of the business and getting paid off of how much better the business does in the future. Instead, what we did was a promissory note where I was the bank. And we did it for 7 years. And so I'm in the middle of it right now. In hindsight, I'm thinking the promissory note was the way to go. It really was. I'm gaining interest on it, and there's a monthly check. And we did work out throughout. I knew when the cash flow was the best for the business, so we did work out that first year a couple of balloon payments that really wouldn't affect the business too much because the cash flow was so strong.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever at any point wonder what you would have gotten if you would have sold it to a third party, or did you just know that it was right based on your partner and the dynamics between you guys?
Well, my thought was if we would have gone out to market to a third party, we probably would have gotten a higher price. But how much higher, I don't know. And it felt right to do it. And in part of the deal we worked out was that I would stay on for a year on a part-time basis. And so I was doing that. I came in, my office with business brokerage wasn't too far from my old business office. And so I came in on Wednesday and Friday mornings. And about halfway through the year, I told the guys, I said, you know what, you're wasting your money. Everything's done. Everybody's running the show here. I'm not needed. And they agreed. And so even though we had a transition period of a year, we ended up only doing it for 6 months.
Interesting. And I think you hit on something that is a good gem, because you said it felt right. And there's a lot of business owners and a lot of our listeners where once you understand that you've got enough money afterwards, that there is this variable of feeling right and making sure you're happy afterwards. And whether it's internal or external, to a third party, how you leave your legacy or leave your business is important, and understanding what actually will make you happy and what feels right to you is a very important variable. And I don't know, with your experience on the business owners you're working with today, if do you emphasize that to individuals, and how do you quantify that?
Yeah, with the owners that I'm dealing with now, it's interesting because I'll go in and do evaluation, and their expectations are always so high, and usually my valuation is lower than what they think, and many times I'll just say to them, let's work on your business end, because what you want is you're not there. And and the owners do need to, and quite often then they will then step back and say, okay, I'm hearing what the market's telling me. I'm realizing that I need to be at a certain price, and yeah, it's just a matter of coming in at that right number.
And so, if you were to do one thing over again, what would it be?
It just everything went really well, and I can't think of anything. I talked about the SBA, and at the time I really thought, I was taking the second best solution by doing the promissory note, but in hindsight I think it turned out to be the best thing. Otherwise, it just was a smooth transition. There really weren't any hiccups. I had the right team in place. I guess one thing, I didn't have somebody like you, Ryan, which I probably should have at the beginning, to kind of guide me as to, with this windfall of money, and, what are you going to do with it, that kind of thing. I eventually did afterwards have a financial planner that helped me and guided me through that. But it just went real well. There were no hard feelings, and my goal was to see the business continue on and be successful, and it has been. There really, from what I could tell, there was no exodus of employees. That all the key people still stayed on, and they believed. I had 3 really good partners, and so they believed in what they were doing and what they can do, and they threw a surprise party for me, which I didn't. I was very surprised, and we just had a good time.
That's awesome. I'm assuming, given the business that you were in, it was a pretty kick-ass party.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was they convinced me it was a Christmas party, and it turned out to be where I walked in and they did the whole surprise thing. And yeah, I mean, we did it at our warehouse. So you go into our warehouse, there's props all over the place.
I was gonna say, was it a winter wonderland like you had done for Chrysler?
Yeah, not that, but they put up a stage, and they did because we do production, they did video production and interviewed some past customers and past employees. And I mean, for them, it was really easy just to pull something like that together. And so it was a really nice event.
That's awesome. So where can our listeners find you today?
I'm at Calhoun Companies, and my email is sthompson@calhouncompanies.com. And I'm selling businesses, and I'm loving it. It's just every day I'm talking with business owners, and I'm talking with people that want to buy. And the activity right now is incredible. There's just a lot of boomers out there ready to sell. And what's happening is you're finding good businesses. A lot of times, the first question the buyer says is, "What's wrong with the business?" Well, there's a lot of good businesses out there, and there's nothing wrong with them. They're like me. They hit a brick wall, and they're ready to move on and do something different. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That's great. So, one last piece of advice that you can give our listeners based on your experience with dealing with other business owners.
Well, I would say make sure that when you're ready to sell, that you're making money. It's interesting, but believe it or not, sometimes owners don't realize that. And they think they have a great business and a great model and really good customers and fantastic employees, and they're doing everything they can at the end of the year not to make money for the tax hit. But when you're ready to go, you need 3 good years. So think about it. Even 3 years before you sell, start and have a good trend. Have it so that every year you're showing even more profit. That really is the key, because that's the first thing buyers look at. How much money they're making. And if you're not making the money, they won't even look at you. But if you are, then they'll want to dig in and know more.
Well, that's great, Sam. I very much appreciate you coming on the show.
Okay, Ryan, thanks.